Beneath your feet, right now, there are creatures threading through the darkness, tunneling, turning, quietly transforming the very ground you walk on. Some soils hold more than 1 million of them in a single acre. 1 million. And most of us walk right over them without a second thought. These are earthworms. And tonight, we're going to slow down, get close to the ground, and discover just how extraordinary these small, unassuming beings truly are. You know, it's funny. We tend to think of impressive wildlife as something far away, something exotic, a humpback whale breaching the ocean surface, or a snow leopard threading through mountain passes. But here, quietly working beneath the soil of almost every garden, every forest, every meadow on Earth, are creatures that have been shaping life on this planet for hundreds of millions of years. Long before the dinosaurs walked the Earth, earthworms were already doing their work. Isn't that something? So let's take a journey. Not to some distant jungle or faraway reef, but down, into the soil, into the rich, quiet darkness where earthworms live. Get comfortable, take a slow breath, and let's spend some time with one of nature's most underappreciated wonders. Welcome back to Sleepy Sycamore, where we explore the peaceful wonders of the natural world. Imagine you're kneeling in a garden after a gentle rain. The air smells of damp earth, that deep, rich scent that always feels so grounding, so ancient. You press your fingers into the soft soil, and if you look closely, you might see one. A long, pinkish-brown ribbon of muscle gently moving through the earth. This is the earthworm. Now, earthworms belong to a group of animals called annelids, which simply means ringed or segmented creatures. If you look at an earthworm, you can see those distinct rings running all the way down its body, like a very long, very stretchy accordion. Each of those rings is called a segment, and a single earthworm can have anywhere from a few dozen to several hundred of them, depending on the species. There are, wonderfully, over 6,000 known species of earthworms in the world. 6,000. They range from tiny thread-like creatures barely a centimeter long, all the way to the magnificent Giant Gippsland earthworm of Australia, which can stretch to over 3 meters in length. 3 meters. Now that is a happy little accident of nature. Most of the earthworms you and I encounter in our gardens fall somewhere in between, usually between 5 and 30 centimeters. The common earthworm, Lumbricus terrestris, is one of the most familiar. That classic pinkish-brown earthworm that surfaces on rainy nights and has surprised many a child on a morning walk. Now, here's something I find wonderfully peaceful about earthworms. They are, at their core, creatures of simplicity. No eyes, no ears, at least not in any conventional sense. They don't hunt, they don't chase, they don't need to be fast or flashy or fierce. They simply move through the world slowly and purposefully, doing exactly what they've always done. There is something deeply calming about that. Their bodies are mostly muscle and water, around 80 or 90% water actually. This is why they need moist conditions to survive. Their skin isn't just a covering, it's a breathing surface. Earthworms take in oxygen directly through their skin, which means it must stay damp at all times. This is why they come to the surface after rain, not because they're drowning, as people often think, but because the moist conditions allow them to travel safely without drying out. Let me tell you about how an earthworm moves, because it really is quite elegant once you understand it. Each segment contains 2 sets of muscles, circular muscles that run around the body like little rings, and longitudinal muscles that run lengthwise. When an earthworm wants to move forward, it contracts its circular muscles at the front, making that part of its body thin and long, and pushes it forward. Then it anchors with tiny bristle-like structures called seta, tiny little hairs you can barely see, and contracts the longitudinal muscles to pull the rest of its body up, thin and long, then short and fat, thin and long, then short and fat, a slow, rhythmic wave of movement through the soil. It is, in its own quiet way, a beautiful thing to watch. Now here's where things get really interesting. Earthworms feed on organic matter, fallen leaves, decomposing plant material, fungi, bacteria, all of that rich, dark stuff that accumulates in soil. They ingest soil as they move through it, extracting the nutrients they need and passing the rest through their bodies. And what comes out the other end are castings, worm castings. And these, my friends, are nothing short of garden gold. Worm castings are extraordinarily rich in nutrients. They contain nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and a whole host of trace minerals in forms that are immediately available to plants. Gardeners and farmers prize them enormously. But we'll come back to just how much earthworms give to the soil in a little while. First, let's talk about something I find quietly remarkable. Earthworms have no brain, at least not in the way we think of brains. They have a simple cluster of nerve cells at the front of their body called a cerebral ganglion and a nerve cord running the length of their body. And yet, they respond to light, they sense vibration, they navigate through the soil, they even learn in very simple ways to avoid unpleasant stimuli. Life, it turns out, doesn't need complexity to be extraordinary. So now that we've gotten to know the earthworm a little, let's go deeper into the science, into what's actually happening inside that long-ringed body as it moves through your garden soil. Let's start with digestion, because it is genuinely fascinating. When an earthworm takes in soil, it passes through a structure called the pharynx, then into the esophagus, where something interesting happens. Calcium carbonate is secreted to neutralize acids in the decaying organic matter. From there, the material enters a crop, a holding chamber, and then a muscular gizzard, where it is ground up. Earthworms sometimes swallow small grit particles to help with this, much like birds do. Then it moves into a long intestine, where enzymes and microbes break down the organic material, extracting sugars, proteins, and other nutrients. What remains, that nutrient-dense casting, is deposited back into the soil. The whole process is remarkably efficient. Now, here's something I love. Earthworms don't just passively eat the organic matter they encounter. They actually help inoculate it. Their guts are home to a rich community of bacteria and microorganisms, and as organic matter passes through, it's colonized by these microbes. When the castings are deposited, they introduce these beneficial organisms directly into the soil. So earthworms aren't just extracting nutrients, they're actively spreading the microbial communities that make soil alive. Soil, you see, is not just dirt. Healthy soil is teeming with life. A single teaspoon of good garden soil can contain more microorganisms than there are people on Earth. And earthworms are one of the great engineers of this underground ecosystem. Let's talk about reproduction, because even here, earthworms have their own gentle complexity. Earthworms are hermaphrodites, meaning each individual has both male and female reproductive organs. But they don't self-fertilize. When two earthworms mate, they lie alongside each other, head to tail, and exchange sperm. It is a slow, patient process. They are, in many ways, creatures who take their time. After mating, each earthworm produces a cocoon, secreted from a glandular band near the front of the body called the clitellum. You might have noticed this before. It's that smooth, slightly raised band that looks different from the rest of the worm's body. The cocoon hardens into a protective casing, often described as looking like a tiny lemon, yellowish-brown, and about the size of a match head. Inside, the eggs develop anywhere from 1 to 20 young earthworms, depending on the species. These young worms emerge already fully formed, miniature versions of the adults, ready to begin their slow work in the soil. There is something wonderfully complete about that. And here's something remarkable about earthworm regeneration, because I know this is a question many people have. Can an earthworm grow back if it's cut in two? The honest answer is, sometimes, and it depends very much on where the cut happens and which species we're talking about. Some species can regenerate a new tail if the front portion is intact, but the tail portion, generally, cannot grow a new head. So while earthworms do have some regenerative capacity, the idea that cutting one worm creates two healthy worms is sadly more myth than reality. What it does do, quite often, is create one surviving worm and one very short-lived tail. Nature doesn't always follow our tidy expectations. And isn't that part of what makes it so endlessly interesting? Now let's take a gentle tour around the world, because earthworms, it turns out, are nearly everywhere. And in each place they inhabit, they shape the land in quiet but profound ways. Earthworms are found on every continent except Antarctica. They thrive in temperate forests, tropical rainforests, grasslands, wetlands, and agricultural fields. They are most diverse and abundant in moist, temperate regions with rich organic soils, places like the forests of Europe and North America, the grasslands of New Zealand, and the tropical soils of Central and South America. In a temperate, deciduous forest, imagine the leaf litter, those deep, rusty drifts of oak and maple leaves that pile up each autumn. To us, they look like a soft carpet. To an earthworm, they are a banquet. Over the course of a year, a healthy population of earthworms in a forest can process the entire annual leaf fall, drawing it down into the soil and incorporating it into the earth. An entire forest's autumn leaves, quietly consumed and transformed. In the tropics, earthworm diversity is extraordinary. Species have evolved in all shapes and sizes to fill different ecological niches. Some are surface dwellers, living in the leaf litter. Some are shallow burrowers. Others, the deep burrowing species, create vertical channels that can extend more than 2 meters into the ground. These deep burrows are particularly valuable as they channel rainwater deep into the soil and allow air to reach plant roots far below the surface. New Zealand has a rich and ancient earthworm fauna, with many endemic species found nowhere else on Earth. Some of these have been here since before New Zealand separated from the ancient supercontinent Gondwana, making them among the most ancient lineages of earthworms on the planet. They are quiet links to a world almost unimaginably old. But perhaps the most famous earthworm in the world is the Giant Gippsland earthworm, found only in a small region of Victoria, Australia. These are extraordinary animals. They can reach 3 meters in length, and when they move through their burrows, you can actually hear them, a soft, gurgling sound as they squeeze through the soil. They're listed as a vulnerable species, and their burrows, which can persist for decades, are protected habitats. Imagine walking across a paddock in Gippsland on a quiet morning and hearing the earth itself, very gently, breathing. There are also fascinating earthworms adapted to unusual environments. Some species in Southeast Asia are semi-aquatic, living in waterlogged soils or even the margins of streams. Others in high-altitude environments are adapted to survive periods of freezing. When conditions become dry or cold, many species can enter a state of dormancy called diapause, coiling themselves into a tight ball, reducing their metabolism, and simply waiting for better conditions to return. Patience, it seems, is bred deep into the earthworm. And then there is the question of earthworms and invasive species, which is a chapter of this story that is quieter and more complex than most people realize. In many parts of North America, particularly in the upper Midwest and northern forests, the soils evolved for thousands of years without any native earthworms, after the glaciers of the last ice age wiped them out. These soils and the forests growing in them developed a particular character, a deep layer of undecomposed leaf litter, a certain porosity, a certain community of fungi and microbes, and the forest understory plants evolved to depend on exactly these conditions. Then, beginning with European settlement, earthworm species were accidentally introduced, likely through soil carried in plant pots and the ballast of ships. And these earthworms, doing exactly what earthworms do, began transforming the forest floor, processing the leaf litter, changing the soil structure, and in doing so, disrupting the conditions that many native plants had evolved to need. It is a reminder that even the most beneficial creature in the wrong place can cause unintended consequences. Nature is always more delicate and more interconnected than we realize. Now, let's take a moment to appreciate some of the more wonderful and surprising facts about earthworms, because they really do deserve more of our wonder. Did you know that Charles Darwin spent nearly 40 years studying earthworms? He was fascinated by them. In his final book, published just before his death, he wrote about the extraordinary cumulative power of earthworms over geological time. He calculated that earthworms could bring several tons of soil per acre to the surface each year, and that over centuries and millennia, this quiet, patient work could bury ancient ruins, raise the level of fields, and fundamentally reshape the landscape. He called them nature's plows, and he was right. Darwin observed that the great stone monuments of England, ancient ruins left on the surface of fields, would slowly sink into the earth over centuries. Not because the stones were sinking exactly, but because earthworms were continuously bringing new soil to the surface around them, gradually burying them. A slow, quiet burial, accomplished one tiny casting at a time. There is something almost dreamlike about that. Here's something interesting about earthworm senses. They have no eyes, but they are extraordinarily sensitive to light, particularly ultraviolet light. Special light-sensitive cells called photoreceptors are scattered across their skin. This is why earthworms that surface during the day quickly retreat back into the soil. Prolonged exposure to sunlight can paralyze and ultimately kill them. They are also remarkably sensitive to vibration. You may have heard of the practice of worm charming, where people tap the ground in a rhythmic way to encourage earthworms to the surface. This works because earthworms interpret the vibrations as those of a digging mole, one of their main predators, and come to the surface to escape. It has become, rather delightfully, a competitive sport in some parts of England. The world record, set at the World Worm Charming Championship in Cheshire, is 567 worms charmed from a 3-meter square plot in 30 minutes. Isn't that something? Let's talk about soil, because this is where earthworms truly reveal their importance. Soil is quite honestly one of the most precious and underappreciated substances on Earth. It takes hundreds of years to form even a thin layer of topsoil through the slow weathering of rock, the accumulation of organic matter, and the work of billions of organisms. And earthworms are central to this process. The tunnels that earthworms create as they move through the soil are transformative. They break up compacted earth, creating channels that allow water to drain more freely and air to circulate. Plant roots follow these channels, finding pathways through otherwise dense soil. In a healthy soil, earthworm burrows can increase water infiltration by anywhere from 4 to 10 times compared to soil without worms. During heavy rainfall, this can be the difference between flooding and water being gently absorbed into the earth. Worm castings, as I mentioned earlier, are incredibly rich in plant nutrients. But here's something that really puts it in perspective. Castings have been found to contain 5 times the available nitrogen, 7 times the available phosphorus, and 11 times the available potassium of the surrounding soil. Gardens and farms with healthy earthworm populations genuinely need less fertilizer because the worms themselves are creating fertility. And there is something almost poetic about that cycle. The leaves fall, the worms consume them, the castings enrich the soil, the trees take up those nutrients through their roots, the trees grow and produce more leaves, and the leaves fall again, round and round, quietly, without end. Earthworms sitting at the heart of that cycle, patient and unhurried. There's also the relationship between earthworms and fungi, which is one of the more elegant partnerships in the soil. Many plants, particularly trees, form symbiotic relationships with mycorrhizal fungi, networks of fine fungal threads that extend far beyond the plant's own roots, helping them access water and nutrients. Earthworms, as they move through the soil, ingest and redistribute fungal spores, spreading these beneficial fungi through the earth and helping to establish new fungal networks. They are, in a way, gardeners of the underground fungal world as well. Each time an earthworm passes through the soil, it leaves behind not just its castings, but a changed world, a more connected world. So what does all of this mean for us, for the way we live and the choices we make? It means the soil beneath our feet is not inert, it is alive. And the health of that soil, the earthworms within it, the microbial communities they support, the organic matter they process, is intimately connected to the food we eat, the water we drink, and the air we breathe. When we pour chemicals onto our gardens and farms that harm earthworms, we are, in a very real sense, harming the foundation of life on land. Pesticides, certain fertilizers, soil compaction from heavy machinery, the removal of organic matter, all of these reduce earthworm populations, and in doing so reduce the fertility and resilience of the soil itself. The good news is that earthworms are remarkably responsive to care. Soils that are managed with them in mind, through the addition of compost, the reduction of tillage, the planting of cover crops, can recover their earthworm populations relatively quickly. A garden that is composted and cared for can support healthy earthworm communities within just a few seasons. There is something deeply hopeful about that. These ancient, patient creatures, threading through our soils for hundreds of millions of years, are still here, still doing their quiet work. And they respond with gratitude, in the way that all life does, to being cared for. Next time you turn a spadeful of soil in your garden and find a worm there, pinkish and wriggling in the light, perhaps take just a moment to look. Really look at those delicate rings, at the smooth band of the clitellum, at the way it moves, slowly and purposefully, back toward the dark. Here is a creature that has outlasted the dinosaurs, that helped build the very soil your garden grows in, that Charles Darwin spent 40 years admiring. It is small, yes, quiet, easy to overlook, but in its patient, unhurried way, it is helping to hold the living world together. And so we've spent this evening underground in the rich and quiet dark with the earthworm. We followed them through the soil of forests and gardens and ancient meadows, learned how they eat and breathe and love and tunnel, and discovered just how much of the living world depends on their patient, unhurried work. Nature has a way of hiding its most important workers in the most humble bodies, doesn't it? A million in an acre, threading through the dark, and yet most of us walk right over them without a thought. Tonight, I hope that changes just a little. I hope you carry some of that wonder with you. Thank you so much for joining me here at Sleepy Sycamore. If this peaceful journey brought you some rest and a little more love for the world beneath your feet, I would be so glad to have you back for the next one. Until then, sleep well, friends.